Welcome to The Good, the Bad, and the Solo, where I cover games in a closely related series and see how the game designer grew and changed. Today, we are going to cover Rosenberg's Agricola. Agricola is a farming game, the first in the Harvest Heptalogy as of the time of this video, i.e. 7 works. Arguably with two-player games that might be considered part of the series, but which we won't be covering, it could be considered an ennealogy, or 9 works. Agricola, this little farming, not so little, this farming game was a smash hit in 2008. Years later, it still ranks as number 4 on BoardGameGeek, and led to the birth of a numerous game family. So what created this hit? How did a game about farming climb up the ranks and most of all stay there for years? And does it hold up to repeated solo play? Let's find out. Agricola is a worker placement game with the following features of interest. Spaces for workers to take and execute are randomly determined within each of the 6 stages of the game, then revealed gradually for each round. This provides an element of randomization that juggles people's needs for planning ahead. Workers can grow in number from 2 to 5, allowing actions to ramp up if you can spend the time to add a new worker. Time is of the essence. Each harvest you must feed your family or risk getting negative points. In other words, workers cost you resources and you need to get your engine for food going as well as for points. Gathered resources such as vegetables, wheat, and animals can grow and change. Harvesting fields and breeding animals in particular is widely regarded as very thematic. Major improvements, always available, at least until someone takes them, plus player-dealt minor improvements and occupations allow all kinds of engines to be built. Most times, devoting equal care to every part of scoring, that is, your people, your house, each animal type, each crop type, your fields, and your pastures, is necessary in order to score well. Agricola is among the first thematic worker placement engine building games with high wire tension and special power combinations that are particularly infinite now with the number of expansions of occupations and minor improvements available. And after the game, you can be proud of the farm you've built, even if it's not the best scoring farm. In that way, Agricola allows gamers to make art, essentially, more than most games of its time, or even now. And that's why Agricola is so beloved a game. But how does Agricola hold up in repeated solo play? Let's discuss the peculiarities of the solo game. Now, the solo game follows, for the most part, all of the rules of the multiplayer game, save for a few differences. You need more food per family member. This makes the harvest feed times pack a punch even when there's no one competing for resources. You aren't allowed to use most occupations. Occupations are marked from 1 to 4 or more players, and you can only use the 1+ cards. While there are enough 1+ cards to almost equal out all the others, this still leaves certain interesting occupations not available to you. The ramifications of playing alone are also interesting to consider as well. It's far more of a puzzle, with random variation in occupations and minor improvements to spice it up. You're always going to let that wood in the 3 wood space sit and accumulate its 3 wood for at least a round. That reed isn't going anywhere, nor is that clay. The harvest still pressures you, particularly with the increased food requirement, but you just don't have that competition. Now, there are certain variants that will fix this for you. If you feel it needs fixing, some people feel better without having to compete for resources on top of the stress of feeding your people. So that's definitely a totally valid point of view on the solo game for Agricola. But I feel that this misses some part of the heart of the game, and so it's not my preferred way of playing. Even so, Solo Agricola is still an interesting puzzle, and with the campaign variant, that is, the series of game variant that's provided in the official Solo rules, you can still have a lot of fun with it. So in the series of games, you keep one occupation from each progressive game and build up all the way to 7, but each game you need to score higher in order to keep going in the series. So very interesting solo puzzle challenge. But at the same time, let's consider that there's probably no question that Agricola's main attraction is its minor improvements and occupation cards. With such variety and how they affect what engine you build and how efficient it is, these cards truly do make the game. With something like 10 expansions consisting of even more minor improvements and occupations, there are literally hundreds of cards to choose from now. But in fact, you could say that minor improvements and occupations are not only Agricola's greatest strength, but also Agricola's greatest weakness. Take away the minor improvements and occupations. What do you have left? Frankly, you only have another worker placement euro with some interesting characteristics, forgettable after a year. So, having struck lightning with Agricola, can Uwe Rosenberg capture it again without producing another monstrosity of cards? For the more cards you add, the harder and harder it is to playtest everything. You not only risk introducing cards that combine with older cards produce game-breaking combinations, but you also risk releasing weak cards compared to what's gone before. And everything that's gone before, the more you add, it can be kind of considered a dilution of everything. And I'm pretty sure that Rosenberg, who is also the father of the Bone games, i.e. Bonanza and Friends, didn't want a third game that involved cards to such a high degree. Now, I want to talk about another controversial mechanism that Agricola brought to the table, that of workers costing resources, also known as feeding your people. This mechanism is actually at the heart of Agricola, as well as other games in the Harvest series. But many feel it's an additional, unnecessary stress and a distraction in an otherwise enjoyable engine-building game. And likely in response to this, Rosenberg adjusted his later games so that feeding your people isn't quite so onerous. We see both kinds of changes, that is, reducing dependence on a large number of cards and relaxing the feeding of your people as the Harvest series progresses. And I think that while Agricola will always be the most loved child of this series, some of the other games deserve that love as well. Some, not all. Next time, we'll talk about the second game in the Harvest series, Le Havre, and how it progresses the development of mechanisms in this family of games. We'll see what was kept from Agricola, what was changed, and how this affected the solo game. I think it's also important to note that every game in the Harvest series is almost entirely different from one another, with two exceptions. Agricola and Caverna are the most closely related. But even so, we can still observe patterns as Rosenberg develops as a designer. Join me next time on The Good and the Bad and the Solo.